Neanderthals' surprising diet. Fermented meat maggots revealed. Imagine sitting down to a meal of fermented meat, complete with a side of wriggling maggots. It's not exactly the picture of fine dining we're used to. But new research suggests this might have been a regular part of the Neanderthal menu. Yes, you read that right. Maggots. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. This unconventional diet could hold the key to a long-standing mystery about our ancient cousins. For years, scientists have been puzzled by the chemical signatures found in Neanderthal bones. These signatures, particularly the high levels of nitrogen-15, delta-15N, suggest they were consuming wheat at levels comparable to apex predators like lions and hyenas. But here's the catch. Neanderthals, like us, are omnivores, not specialized carnivores. So how could they have been eating like top predators without suffering from protein poisoning? A deadly condition caused by excessive protein intake. And this is the part most people miss. The answer might lie in the unlikeliest of places. Maggots. But here's where it gets controversial. Could Neanderthals have intentionally consumed maggots as a nutritional powerhouse? Before you cringe, consider this. Maggots are rich in fat, easy to collect in large quantities, and naturally occur on decomposing meat. Indigenous cultures across the Arctic have long viewed maggot-infested fermented meat as a delicacy, not a last resort. So, were Neanderthals ahead of their time in recognizing the value of this unconventional food source? As an anthropologist specializing in ancient diets, I've been part of a team that uncovered a surprising connection. Using nitrogen isotopes, a kind of chemical fingerprint, we found that maggots feeding on decomposing tissue have delta-15N values up to 4 times higher than those of Pleistocene herbivores. This means that if Neanderthals regularly consumed maggots, it could explain their high delta-15N values without requiring them to eat meat, like hypercarnivores. But let's dig deeper. How did we even make this connection? It started with a forensic anthropology dataset originally meant to study decomposition, not ancient diets. By repurposing this data, we discovered that maggots accumulate nitrogen-15 at astonishing rates as they feed on decaying tissue. This finding led us to a bold hypothesis. Neanderthals might have embraced fermented, maggot-rich meat as a staple, not just an occasional snack. And this is the part most people miss. Cultural practices, not just survival needs, likely shaped the Neanderthal diet. Just like indigenous peoples who intentionally allowed meat to decompose to enhance its flavor and nutritional value, Neanderthals might have done the same. Butchering, storing, and fermenting meat would have introduced maggots naturally, turning a simple meal into a nutrient-dense feast. But here's the lingering question. How much of this maggot-rich diet is speculation, and how much is fact? We know maggots are nutrient-dense, but how many would Neanderthals have needed to eat to impact their delta-15N values? And what role did fermentation and storage play in making this diet sustainable? These are questions that still need answers, and they open the door to exciting future research. So, the next time you hear about Neanderthals, don't just think of them as cave-dwelling hunters. Picture them as culinary innovators, embracing fermented meat and maggots as part of a balanced diet. But here's where it gets controversial. Does this challenge our assumptions about what it means to be civilized? After all, if Neanderthals were intentionally fermenting food and consuming maggots, they were far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. What do you think? Could you see yourself adding maggots to your paleo diet? Or does this interpretation of Neanderthal cuisine go too far? Let's discuss in the comments. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Neanderthals' surprising diet. Rotten meat maggots. Ancient culinary secrets revealed. Imagine this. A group of Neanderthals huddled around a fire in a cave. The icy wind howling outside, but the warmth inside is comforting. They are waiting for a freshly hunted gazelle to finish cooking on flat stones. There are no pots or spoons, but they have technique. The meat is carefully cut using a flint knife. And for those still hungry, there are seeds, tubers, and a unique delicacy, rotting meat teeming with nutritious larvae and maggots. This scene could have unfolded 300,000 years ago in what is now Central and Western Europe. But understanding exactly how Neanderthal communities lived and what they ate is a monumental task. However, thanks to scientific advancements, we are beginning to piece together a clearer picture. Recent studies suggest that while Neanderthals didn't have a gastronomy as we understand it today, they did have cultural practices around food. One such study, published in the journal Science Advances, proposes that the consumption of worms was the key to the extremely high nitrogen levels found in Neanderthal bones. For decades, analyses of Neanderthal bone remains have shown exceptionally high levels of stable nitrogen isotopes, often higher than those of carnivorous animals like wolves, hyenas, or lions. This has led to the interpretation that Neanderthals were hypercarnivorous, occupying the highest level of the food chain. But here's where it gets controversial. Human metabolism doesn't allow for the consumption of high amounts of protein like specialized carnivores do. So, the question arises, could Neanderthals show isotopic signatures typical of extreme carnivores if their physiology didn't allow it? Ainara Sistiaga, a researcher at the University of Copenhagen, points out that there are elements we often overlook because they aren't part of our modern food imagination. For example, eating rotten meat full of maggots, which is unthinkable and dangerous today except in some specific cultures like the Inuit, who eat seal meat fermented underground. This research suggests that Neanderthals' signature dish was rotting meat infested with fly larvae, which are responsible for the extremely high nitrogen levels discovered at various sites throughout history. The explanation is that the larvae, feeding on rotting meat, have even higher nitrogen levels than the meat itself, and when consumed along with the tissues, they significantly alter the isotopic record of the person who ingested them. It is also believed that this was a deliberate and strategic decision to increase the consumption of fats and proteins, especially during the colder months. However, the study has its limitations. Manuel Dominguez Rodrigo, a professor at the University of Alcalá, Spain, points out that the hypothesis posed by the new research is highly speculative. For the academic, the high presence of nitrogen in prehistoric populations could be the result of many different processes. He gives as an example the fact that if Neanderthals had consumed large amounts of manure, they would have had the same level of nitrogen in their bones. The problem is how to move from a speculative idea, such as the one presented in this article, to a scientifically verifiable proposition. He summarizes. Until this happens, the expert asserts that the extremely high meat consumption among these humans continues to be more heuristic than unproven alternative scenarios. These uncertainties surrounding what really happened demonstrate the complexity of reconstructing the diet of an extinct species that survived for thousands and thousands of years, in climatic and geographic contexts so changing that we can't even understand them today, says Sistiaga. These types of studies, the expert points out, contribute new pieces to the puzzle of human evolution. From generation to generation, Neanderthal communities pass down their culinary traditions. Another study, published in the journal Frontiers in Environmental Archaeology, compared the differences in how two Neanderthal lineages that lived in nearby caves in the Levant butchered animals they intended to eat. Anna El Jalal, a researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and co-author of the study, explains that finding differences between these two sites indicates that there was a certain cultural diversity surrounding food among contemporary Neanderthal groups. These communities used the caves for the same purposes: residential sections with areas dedicated to daily activities such as flint knapping, cooking, and garbage disposal, as well as for the burial of the deceased. Furthermore, both were surrounded by Mediterranean vegetation with the same animal species and were occupied primarily during the winter. For these reasons, Jallan ventures, We might expect that if all Neanderthal groups behaved the same way, we would recover the same animal butchering techniques at these sites. However, scientists now know that this was not the case and that each community had its own method of processing food. They also discovered that the differences persisted over time, indicating that the knowledge or traditions underlying these variations endured and were passed down from generation to generation. While the available evidence is insufficient to accurately reconstruct specific food preparation techniques, the researchers suggest that there were likely differences in tastes and cooking skills. We can imagine that different Neanderthal groups used similar ingredients, but each had their own signature dishes. Or that they cooked similar dishes, albeit following different recipes, the author emphasizes. Defining the Neanderthal diet is almost as difficult as trying to define a single human diet today. People in the Mediterranean don't eat the same way people do in Southeast Asia. The same is true of our cousins. They occupied such a vast territory that compiling their food atlas is a risky undertaking. Furthermore, some foods, like meat, leave their mark, in this case, on the bones. But others, like legumes or vegetables, don't. Sistiaga goes into detail. Plant remains, for example, are difficult to find in bones. Techniques such as dental tartar analysis have been used to detect plant DNA or proteins, but the findings are anecdotal. The plant fibers found in the teeth of different individuals could have gotten there in many ways, not just through ingestion. Plant remains are less well preserved in archaeological sites, so we still have an overrepresentation of animal proteins. Hence the myth of hypercarnivores. But there was much more. A study published in 2023 found that 90,000 years ago in what is now Lisbon, Portugal, Neanderthals feasted on charred seafood. Further into the central Iberian Peninsula, a 2017 study found that these early humans gathered and ate mushrooms. A 2011 review even suggests that honey may have been an important source of energy back then. What is beyond doubt is that the race for good food decisively shaped the genus Homo. A 2015 study suggested that the germ of the ability to cook appeared more than 6 million years ago, and that since then, the taste for cooked food has helped the human brain achieve its modern size and power. Since once cooked, food becomes easier to digest, and in the same quantities as raw food, leaves more calories in the body. Evidence suggests that flavor optimization may have been one of the major evolutionary drivers, and it all began, perhaps, with a piece of maggot-infested meat. And this is the part most people miss. The idea that our ancient relatives had a more diverse and strategic diet than we often imagine. So, what do you think? Could Neanderthals' unique dietary habits have played a more significant role in their evolution than we previously thought? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Neanderthals ate maggots? New science debunks hypercarnivore myth. Neanderthals were not the meat-loving hypercarnivores we once thought. Instead, they had a surprisingly diverse diet that included an unexpected delicacy: maggots. Recent research reveals that these ancient humans enjoyed more than just wild game, roasted birds, seafood, and various plants. Chemical analyses of their bones indicate that they likely consumed significant amounts of fresh maggots, which served as a nutritious side dish. This new perspective, presented by researchers from the United States, challenges the long-held belief that Neanderthals were at the pinnacle of the food chain, alongside formidable predators like cave lions and saber-toothed tigers, who were known for their substantial meat consumption. Instead of indulging in endless mammoth steaks, scientists propose that Neanderthals preserve their kills for extended periods, opting for the fatty portions of the meat and the maggots that thrived on decaying carcasses. John Speth, a professor emeritus of anthropology at the University of Michigan, stated, "Neanderthals were not hypercarnivores. Their diet was different. It's likely that maggots constituted a major part of their food supply. Traditionally, Neanderthals were considered apex predators due to the elevated levels of heavy nitrogen found in their bones. This nitrogen accumulates in organisms as they metabolize protein from their diet. The lighter nitrogen-14 is excreted more easily than the heavier nitrogen-15, leading to a buildup of heavy nitrogen at each level of the food chain, from plants to herbivores and then to carnivores. However, researchers argue that while the heavy nitrogen levels in Neanderthal bones suggest they were at the top of the food chain, they could not have consumed the vast quantities of meat necessary to achieve those levels. Speth explained, humans can only handle about 4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, while animals, like lions, can safely consume 2 to 4 times that amount. Intrigued by the dietary habits of various indigenous cultures that often include maggots in their meals, the researchers decided to investigate the role of maggots in the Neanderthal diet. The experiments conducted were not for the faint-hearted. Dr. Melanie Beasley, part of the research team at Purdue University in Indiana, previously worked at the Forensic Anthropology Center, commonly known as the Body Farm, at the University of Tennessee. This facility studies donated human bodies as they decompose, aiding forensic scientists in refining their techniques, such as determining the time of death. Beasley analyzed the heavy nitrogen content in decomposing muscle tissue and the maggots that infested the bodies. She found that while heavy nitrogen levels increased slightly as the muscle decayed, they were significantly higher in the maggots. This same process would have occurred in the carcasses that Neanderthals stored, according to Beasley. The findings, published in Science Advances, suggest that rather than consuming meat as voraciously as lions and other hypercarnivores, Neanderthals likely obtained their high levels of heavy nitrogen by eating maggots, which were themselves rich in this nutrient. Karen Hardy, a professor of prehistoric archaeology at the University of Glasgow, remarked, "The only reason this is surprising is that it contradicts what we in the West consider food. In many parts of the world, a wide variety of items are consumed, and maggots are an excellent source of protein, fat, and essential amino acids." She further noted, for Neanderthals, it was a no-brainer. Just leave some meat out for a few days, and then return to collect the maggots. It's an incredibly simple way to obtain nutritious food. So, how does this new understanding change our perspective? The idea of Neanderthals as top carnivores is fundamentally flawed. It was physiologically impossible. This research not only makes sense of their dietary habits, but also clarifies the high nitrogen signals in a way that previous theories have failed to do. What do you think? Could this shift in understanding challenge our views on ancient diets? Share your thoughts in the comments.